Hello, story folk. You're listening to Lore and Legend with your hosts Sebastian Odell and Rick Scott, bringing you myths, legends, and fables from world folklore and mythology. We tell stories in the traditional style, and we enrich our tales with traditional music and dramatic audio work. Welcome to our latest episode of Lore Talk. If this is your first time listening, most of our episodes consist of a story, followed by a discussion about the folklore and mythology that it springs from. But in Lore Talk episodes, we catch up on some of our previous discussions, make announcements about the future of the podcast, and discuss some of the myth and folklore around our holiday specials, which don't come with a discussion due to their tighter production times. In this episode, we'll recap our most recent holiday specials, and you'll hear two real-world legends of the Blue Rose uncovered since we did Sarah's original fairy tale for Valentine's Day. We'll look ahead to Series 2 and how you can prime yourself on Greek culture and mythology before diving into our exploration of the Greek gods of death, dream, and dark fate. This episode of Lore and Legend comes thanks to the contributions of our Patreon subscribers, Storyfolk Christy Carson and Paul Jackson. Thanks to both of you for your generosity and your enthusiasm for our stories. Please consider joining Christy and Paul in supporting the podcast by becoming a patron. For more details, visit our website and click Support Us, or go directly to our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/loreandlegend. The Lore and Legend theme music in this episode is by Robert Bentall. You'll also hear music today from US composer Caleb Hennessy. Please see the episode notes for credits, and full audio credits are available at www.loreandlegend.co.uk. Hello and welcome back to all of you. We've been away for a couple of months, but we're releasing again. We're looking back at the last episodes we've done, and we're also looking forward to our future series.
Yeah, and this episode of Lore and Legend comes to you from lockdown, the brave new world that everyone's contending with at the moment.
And that Corona life.
Yeah, so rather than recording together in the studio, we're actually using Zoom and Clean Feed to do a virtual recording session. So
we hope that you're all safe and well. We know that when this comes out, we'll still be in lockdown by latest projections.
The last few episodes have all been you will have heard my voice an awful lot, but not Seb's, and that's not because he vanished away, but he was unavoidably detained with other matters. So do you want to let us know a bit about what you're up to, Seb?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been, off and on for a while, applying to do a PhD as a continuation of my master's research. I was putting together a submission for research funding, which has been submitted, and they think I've got a reasonable chance of getting it. So that's all good news so far. Hypothetically, I'm supposed to find out in 10 days, so wish me luck, everyone.
Yeah, best of luck with that. You can join the hallowed ranks of us PhD students.
That's it. I forgot that you were Dr. Scott.
The agony and the ecstasy. What's your thesis about?
The subject area is psychology, more specifically social psychology, and my master's research was done into jealousy in the context of adult attachment. So we're talking about, predominantly for my research, romantic relationships, although it's looking at the way that people are motivated to think of themselves and evaluate themselves, particularly in comparison to other people. So it's geared up to sort of understand why we feel the need to measure ourselves in this way and how we could sort of work to ameliorate it.
Well, it all sounds a lot more serious and worthy than my own PhD research on the history of dreams.
Well, if we didn't have your research in that, then these listeners wouldn't be getting season 2 of Lore and Legend. So don't tell them that.
That's true. Be that a blessing or a curse.
You'll have to work it out for yourselves.
And it also seems like a good jumping off point for talking about the Valentine's Day episode.
Yeah, absolutely. Because while everybody's there waiting desperately for season 2, we've been bringing out seasonal episodes. We've got this tale from somebody who's been a contributor to this to Lore and Legend before, because Sarah contributed The Last Wolf to us, didn't she?
She did, yep. And Sarah, in one of her stories that she's writing, included a short telling of a fairy tale that I kind of fell in love with. And I asked her if we could do a version of that on the podcast. And she said yes. And I invited her to come and do the episode. But she said that actually what she was most interested in was seeing what I would do with it.
It's quite interesting to me because, of course, when we had The Last Wolf, it was full of beautiful description and really intense focus on the action. But the story in the form that you got it from Sarah was it was more schematic than that, wasn't it? So you've elaborated quite a bit on it.
Yeah, well, it's very much the process that we go through when creating performances for the podcast. In the sense, what she'd created was, her characters tell a folk tale in the universe of her story, in a very kind of like short and abbreviated form, as many folk tales are related from one person to another, and that was part of the beauty of it. It mimicked the sort of structure and style of a folk tale, in its bare bone, in its essentials, in exactly the way that usually looks. So it was really a pleasure to kind of take that and then develop it into the sort of more developed kind of storytelling performances that we do in this podcast. I quite enjoyed that.
Yes, because it's the sort of thing that's the bones that would be taken on by another storyteller if they wanted to do their own version. It would keep the main central plot points and themes, but then develop it in their own way for their own purposes.
As well as seeing Sarah's tale, I was also working with a friend in her garden, and we got talking about roses, because she's got lots of beautiful roses in her garden. I can't remember why, but I asked if there was such thing as a blue rose. Do you get blue roses? And she told me that blue roses were kind of like infamously sort of something that florists have kind of pursued in the past, like trying to breed a blue rose, but that it had never been done successfully before. And I thought, oh, well, that's a fantastic idea, a fantastic kind of story, isn't it? And originally Sarah's tale was about a blue flower, but it wasn't a blue rose specifically. So when I was thinking about this is what kind of got my mind turning, and I said to her, oh, well, why don't I tell the story and why don't we make it a blue rose? Because a blue rose is this thing that sort of doesn't exist in nature, but people are kind of striving for.
The sort of florist's philosopher's stone.
Yes, of the gardener's world. So yeah, it's interesting because we kind of how we independently kind of came to that idea, and then almost after we'd done that, I actually started, researching the blog post and blue roses. And we just ended up discovering, after the fact, that there are actually already folk tales and legends about blue roses.
Because in the podcast episode, the blue rose has a lot of symbolism for the unattainable, the unreachable, the things that you sort of strive for. Just in the same way that the what's her name, Rosalia in the garden is looking at the stars, and they talk about the stars as things that you can look at and strive for but never reach.
Yes, and drawing down the moon, which is there's another whole kind of area of folklore about the symbolism of the moon and falling in love with the moon and that kind of thing as something that is kind of tantalizingly within the human sphere. It's much closer than all the other planets and stars, but yeah, it's still out of our reach. But it sometimes feels like you could reach out and touch it.
Mm.
Yeah, so that worked really well. But these legends about the blue rose, these legends about the blue rose that already exist, it's exactly the same thing. The blue rose sort of symbolizes unattainable or impossible love. So it was really, really quite cool and exciting to find that the similarities between the fairy tale that Sarah had written independently and then the actual folklore about blue roses, which contains many of the same ideas. Even as you'll hear, because we're going to tell you the blue rose folk tales now. Up to and including, in Sarah's story, there is a necromancer and a magician. And in one of these stories, there is also kind of a magician or inventor who tries to create a blue rose. So yeah, that was really cool. They're originally Chinese folktales. Worth saying that the sources that we found for them are all online. There are two different folk tales, both claim to come from China. One of them we sort of found on Chinese websites using Google Translate, and the other is most of the versions that we find are actually English versions told by English or American storytellers, which say that they're from a Chinese tradition, but I don't actually have any
Chinese sources on
Chinese oral sources or anything like that. So I guess these are allegedly Chinese folk tales, but we can't put solid academic bona fides to that.
Yeah, best to put in a caveat, this being a folklore podcast, we don't want to mislead the listeners.
Yeah, well, I mean, we can say they're not. We don't know about their history, but they are part of contemporary Chinese folklore about blue roses. So yes, without any further ado, we're going to play for you now two legends of the blue rose.
The Legends of the Blue Rose. The first legend. Once there was an emperor's daughter who came of age and was to be married. And her father decided to give his daughter the right to make one demand of the man who had become her husband. When he asked her daughter to make her demand, she said, "Father, I will marry the man who can bring to me the blue rose." Well, when they heard of her demand, many who might have sought the hand of the princess were dissuaded, for who had ever seen or heard of such a thing as a blue rose? But some of these men were determined. A merchant who desired to marry her paid a florist to give him a rose that was painted blue. Then the merchant presented the rose to the princess, but a drop of the blue paint fell from the petals onto the back of her hand. "This is not a blue rose," she said. "I will not marry you." Then there was another man, and he threatened to kill the servants of his household if they could not find for him a blue rose. They panicked until one of them had an idea. He went to the village and he found a jeweler. The jeweler took a sapphire and carved it into the shape of a rose. But when it was presented to the princess, she said, "I can see that your heart is as cold as this piece of stone. This is not a blue rose. I will not marry you." There was another man who was very clever. He sought out a wizard, and he asked the wizard to create for him a blue rose. The wizard gave him a mirrored box, in which there appeared a perfect illusion of a blue flower. The clever man presented it to the princess. She reached out, and her fingers passed straight through the vision of the blue rose. "I won't marry a man who deals in deceptions," she said to him. "This is no blue rose, and I will not marry you." Having sent the man away, the princess retreated then to the gardens. She sat there and she waited for the gardener's son. The two of them had known each other for years, since they were young and they had played together. They knew each other's hearts, and she confessed to him that really she loved him, and that it was him who she wanted to marry. The young man thought for a moment, and then he said to her, "Go to bed, and in the morning I will bring you the blue rose." Well, the next morning, the young man, he marched into the palace, and he presented the princess with a white rose. Everyone stared and whispered to each other. Surely both of them could see this wasn't a blue rose, but a common white one. But the princess took the flower from him, and she turned to everybody else and she declared, "This rose is a blue rose." And the emperor agreed. He said, "If my daughter sees a blue rose, then this is a blue rose." And the princess and the gardener's son were married, and they lived happily until the end of their days. The second legend. Once there was a boy who lived on his own, deep in the forest. He tended a beautiful garden there. His favourite flowers were roses, and he grew roses there of every kind and colour. Through sun and rain and wind, he would happily sit there in his garden, admiring, even talking to his roses. But there was one kind of rose that he could not grow, and that was the blue rose. The boy dreamed of breeding a rose with blue petals. If he could grow a blue rose, when he found the girl that he wanted to give his heart to, then he would present her with it. Well, love always comes to us by chance. One day, the boy was walking down the stream when he came across a girl who was injured. He took her home. He nursed her back to health. And as he cared for her, the two of them grew close. And eventually they fell in love. The boy told her about his dream of growing a blue rose. Yes, he still dreamed of it. He swore to her that one day he would give her a blue rose. Yet no matter how hard he tried, the roses that he bred in his garden were never blue. Well, until one morning. The sun rose. The boy stepped out into the garden and he stopped. There, rising up from amongst the white, the red, the pink, the yellow, purple and black roses, was a beautiful blue rose. The boy could not believe his eyes. His heart leapt for joy. He drew the girl out into the garden excitedly to show her. "Look," he said. "Now I know for sure our love is true. Out of it has grown this, a blue rose." Oh, and they were happy. Until one day when the sky was dark, and lightning flashed, and thunder rolled. Startled by the lightning, out of her dreams, the girl looked out, saw with panic that rain was washing down the windows. She ran out into the garden. The rain drenched her from head to foot, and she stared at the roses, her heart filling rapidly with sorrow and despair. Then the boy looked out of the house and saw her standing outside. Behind her in the garden, there were red and yellow and pink and purple and black and white roses. There were no blue roses to be seen. But the grass beneath her bare feet was stained with blue paint. The lightning flashed again, and so anger flashed through the boy's heart. If she loved him, how could she lie to him? Her love, like the flower, it must be a lie. For an instant, their eyes met. He saw the water running down her face, but her tears were lost in the rain. Then, as the lightning flashed again, the boy turned and he ran from the house. The girl didn't follow him. She didn't leave the garden. Instead, she stayed and she wept for days. The roses of the garden withered around her. And as she looked out over the dying flowers, she was unable to bear the pain of her own broken heart. She sank to her knees. Her tears dripped down onto the petals of those withered flowers. And at their touch, the roses suddenly began to bloom again with life. It was days later that the boy awoke in the forest, and he knew the truth in his heart that she had painted the roses blue because she really loved him. And he ran back to the rose garden, calling out to her. When he came, there was no sign of the girl that he loved. There was only the garden full of roses, and each one of them blushed a beautiful shade of true blue. And on the petals of those flowers were raindrops, and each one of those raindrops looked just like the tears of a girl. Sarah's story of the blue rose. A long time ago there was a king who loved his queen, but she died young from an illness, and he was heartbroken. He cried out to heaven to return her to him, but when God didn't listen to his prayers, he turned to the desert instead. And he summoned an evil genie to the palace. The genie made a flower called Leilani grow out of the mouth of the king's wife. The genie made a blue rose grow out of the mouth of the king's wife. And he told the king that the flower held the seed of her soul and instructed him to give it to his next wife. So his first wife could be reborn in her body. He warned the king never to touch the flower and never to touch his wife once she had returned. The king was very grateful and showered the genie with riches. Now, one story says that the king searched his kingdom for a second wife, but couldn't find anyone who matched up to his first. The floweret was dying and he was running out of time, and so in despair he kissed the flower that housed her soul. At that moment he saw her in front of him, and then he fell into a deep sleep. The palace fell into chaos. The palace then was in chaos because his advisors thought that he was dying. But then he woke, seemingly in perfect health, and he asked, "Where is my husband?" Now, living in the body of the king, the queen ruled the kingdom from then onwards, grieving for her lost husband. Some say that she ruled until the end of her days, but some said she could not bear to see her husband's face in the mirror every day, and she took her own life. Another story says that the king gave the rose to the most beautiful of his concubines. The queen was reborn in her, but in the end he could not resist kissing her. Then the story ends in the same way as the first.
I mean, I guess it makes a lot of sense that you've got the same kind of symbolism, because there's this common cultural experience of gardeners everywhere trying to make a blue rose. It's not just Western gardeners, but it's a thing that people have been trying to do all over the world for a long time. That you then get symbolism from that's all that we strive for but can't quite have.
Yeah, like you see in that first tale, there's actually a history as well of people creating artificial blue roses. People, she paints, one of them paints a blue rose, and gardeners did actually put blue dye into the soil, which got sucked up into the roots of some plants, some roses, and sort of turned them blue or purplish. And it is actually, in actual fact, there was a Japanese research team which has created a genetically modified blue rose in recent times. But what's funny about that is that they created, apparently, that genetically speaking, the rose is the colour of true blue. But actually, when you look at it, what most people see is a shade of purple or violet. So it doesn't actually look blue at all, really. It doesn't look quite right. So, I mean, that's great in many ways. That's just kind of like plays into the whole sort of story about unattainability and not quite getting what you're looking for.
And you've mentioned the moon as a bridge for souls. And does that come from a tradition? Does that come from?
It comes up a lot in Greek mythology, or in Greek philosophy. So, and from there into Western philosophy. So there's this idea that the heavens are this realm of pure and perfect matter that's associated with the abode of the gods and things, and that impure and imperfect matter exists on Earth, and so in Aristotle and stuff like that, the crystalline spheres of the heavens, the planets are supposed to be embedded in this pure crystalline fifth element. And the motion of the planets is conceived of as being, sort of perfect and this celestial harmony. And in that model of the universe, the moon is the closest stellar body to us. And the idea is that it is almost a bridge between those realms, the imperfect world below the sky, and the perfect world that's above it. And in some Neoplatonic philosophy, they say that a lot of the guiding spirits that communicate between mankind and the gods live on the moon. Spirits and dreams and oracles come through that kind of like passageway of the moon. Gods of the underworld are also associated with the moon as sort of a passage between this world and the next world. So again, the physical world and the spiritual world. Gods like Hecate and Pluto, or sometimes Diana and all that kind of stuff, will be associated with the moon, but also with witchcraft, because it is a bridge through which divine power can be drawn from the spiritual world into our world. So yeah, there are a lot of precedents for that in real world mythology. Of course, we had a moon story as well in the first series, The Buried Moon.
We'll try and keep up a moon story every series.
That's quite a commitment.
I think we can build it. No, I don't know.
But yes, we definitely played on the moon, and we also had this kind of recurring theme of these sort of characters, these travelers who kind of like meet up underneath the moon and are searching for something. That was part of the it was part of the Buried Moon tale, especially at the end. It was part of the Blue Valentine story, and yeah, that may come up again in series 2 as well. So there are some interesting themes to explore. I mean, one of the things that kind of comes up in this one is about the nature of loving a particular person, in the sense of so through this kind of translation of Rosalia's soul into the flower, he's told that if he finds, he can transfer her soul into another body, and of course, these characters aren't supposed to be moral paradigms or anything. I mean, very obviously, he's searching for somebody to steal their body from them. So he's definitely not a good character. But at the same time, he sort of has all of this kind of like existential crisis about what it actually means to put somebody's soul into another body. To what extent is the way that you feel about somebody also, like, how does that comprise part of their identity? Not in, because I mean, you can think of that in a very shallow way, and it can be what one way to pitch the story would be, oh, he couldn't find anybody who was beautiful enough to match up to the woman that his wife had been, and that would very much be that, like you say, like love and as being dependent on beauty and all that kind of thing. But Marinus is more kind of like worried about whether somehow putting her soul in a different body will turn her into a different person. And I think it's an interesting like thing to think about philosophically. How much is your body and who you are and your physical aspect, how important is that in ways that are valid and or troubling, and how is that and how that may in some ways also change how you experience them.
I mean, definitely it is going to change the way that you experience them. The kind of way that a person looks, the sort of mischievous glance, the boyish smile, the kind of knotted brow, all of these kind of are features of a person, how you experience them, and features of how they know of how to express their feelings physically. I
suppose exploring that idea that it might matter to you, that the way that somebody looks at you changes, or the way that they express or interact with the world. and things like sexual attraction, you can map that onto things that are much more complicated than just how conventionally beautiful somebody is. So in season 2, we're going to be exploring Greek mythology, but sort of an area of Greek mythology which people might not know a lot about, and that's the Greek gods of sleep and dream. So yeah, you'll hear lots of episodes and stories about characters like Endymion, Penelope, Bellerophon, Asclepius, and Odysseus. And you also learn about the sort of the gods of prophecy and sleep and dreams, which includes characters who are probably quite familiar, like Hermes and Apollo, but also the gods of sleep like Hypnos, and the god of dreams, Morpheus, who doesn't go around dispensing red and blue pills in these stories. But
Yes, I was wondering what...
Yeah, really excited about the series, and I'm really excited about we've got a lot of music in the series that's played sort of on authentic Greek music on instruments that are based on instruments from the period, like the kithara and the lyre, by artists like Michael Levy, and people who work at the Greek Museum of Ancient Music in Thessaloniki, Sakilo, and original compositions as well from a US-based composer called Caleb Hennessy. You'll already have heard his music in The Blue Rose and in this episode as well. In Greece, they're making these gorgeous reproductions of Greek instruments from materials that get as close as they can to some of the materials that the ancients used. The quite famously, the lyre is supposed to have been invented by Hermes by placing 2 pieces of wood or 2 horns into a tortoise shell and covering it with a skin of a drum. I think they occasionally use real tortoise shells if they're available. But most of them are wood reproductions, obviously, because we wouldn't condone the
advocate
the massacre of tortoises in these day and age. But
it's supposedly the way that he kindles a friendship with Apollo, isn't it? By revealing to him the lyre and playing it to him. And does he offer Apollo the lyre? I'm trying to remember this now.
He does it very much to get out of trouble.
Yes.
Because he has stolen and slaughtered Apollo's cattle for dinner.
But as I recall, it works.
It does work, yes. Apollo is entranced by the beautiful music, as I'm sure our listeners will be entranced by the beautiful music by these artists in
very well
the
worked
podcast.
Round, I like it, yes.
Yeah, the Museum of Ancient Music is called Sakilo. The workshops that make the instruments are called Luferios, and they make absolutely beautiful instruments. And I did actually buy one of their ancient Greek lyres for myself, which is absolutely amazing. I'm completely incompetent with it.
If I test the amazingness of the lyre, I'm not saying anything about Rick's quality at playing.
Well, originally I got hold of it when I thought it might be actually very difficult to get hold of music for the podcast, and I thought I might have to try my hand at doing some of it myself. Yeah, not only does the museum and the instrument making workshop work together, they've got sort of a new program now called the Lyre Academy, where if you buy one of their instruments, then they actually have tutors online now who will teach you how to play the ancient lyre.
Very nice.
So they've got lots of different courses from beginners and up into sort of intermediate and advanced courses. So yeah, if any of you are musicians, or if you just take fancy becoming a Grecian bard, then go and check them out. We've got all the links for that in the episode notes and in the and on our website. And we're actually looking at putting together an episode where we might interview some of the people from Luferios and the Lyre Academy, and possibly tell some of those Greek legends about music and lyre players and the musical gods of the Greek mythos. So
very good. Yes.
Yeah. Stories that we're exploring. I'm hoping that we can bring something new to, especially for people who haven't, who are already quite familiar with Greek mythology. Some different stories, some different interpretations of stories that you may know as well. But some of our listeners perhaps haven't got very deep into Greek mythology before. In our podcast, we will be delving a little bit into the history of ancient Greece and how the myths and legends are tied to Greek culture. But if you would like to familiarize yourself with the stories of the Iliad and the Odyssey, then here are a few recommendations. Recommendation 1, if you'd like to have sort of a shorter read or digest of the stories of the Iliad and the Odyssey, then The Iliad for Boys and Girls and The Odyssey for Boys and Girls by Alfred John Church is available as a free ebook from Gutenberg Press or as a free audiobook from LibriVox. So that'll give you a sort of a quick and simplified overview of the stories. If you've got Netflix, then you might want to check out the BBC drama Troy, Fall of a City on Netflix. It's all right. It's not my favourite kind of interpretation of Greek myth, but I do have to say that the actor Joseph Maul has the absolute perfect brows for playing Odysseus. I thought he was very well cast.
I'm going to have to look up Joseph Maul.
You might also be interested in sort of modern takes and reinterpretations of the stories of the Iliad. So two that I've read recently are both actually, Pat Barker's The Silence of the Girls is one that I read. And Madeline Miller's The Song of Achilles. Yeah, so those are two great books that I'd recommend. There are lots of podcasts that you can listen to about Greek history. There's the Ancient Greek History podcast by Ryan Stitt. Especially the first few episodes. They get longer as the series goes on, but the first 4 or 5 will give you a fairly good introduction to the whole kind of Greek world and some of its mythology.
So I mean, having listened to that podcast, I'll just jump in there. It gives you a good overview of the historical context of what Greek society was like in the era that a lot of their mythology is set in. Yeah, and the way that their sort of culture and religion sprung up, so you can understand the context in which these kind of mythological events take place.
Yeah, like for instance, we mentioned Hermes eating Apollo's cattle. So one of the things that comes up in the podcast is how valuable cattle was in Greek society. So we understand why they're kind of seen as these sacred animals that the gods kind of have a monopoly on.
Yeah.
Another one that I listen to quite a lot is one of my favourite podcasts actually while researching this is called Ancient Greece Declassified by Lantern Jack. And he interviews lots of classics professors and experts in the field. Each episode's on sort of a different subject. And they're really interesting. So I did doing research for one of our episodes recently. There's a great episode called Penelope, Weaver of Fate, and that sort of helps you to understand various elements of the character Penelope in the myth of the Odyssey. So that's another one that you can check out. There's Liv Albert's Let's Talk About Myths, Baby, which is a podcast which kind of takes a sort of informal, slightly comedic look at the often batshit crazy contents of Greek myth.
Yeah.
There are a series of episodes that cover the Iliad and the Odyssey. So you might have to have a little look for them in their episode catalogue, but that's another way to sort of get caught up on these. Jeff writes podcasts, the Trojan War podcast and the Odyssey podcasts. Now, those are sort of full-on storytelling podcasts, but he does go into all of the myths surrounding the Trojan Wars and the Odyssey, including going into the backstory of characters and pulling out other myths about them. So that's great, but it is a bit of an epic journey in itself. So that's a good one to get into if you really get into the myths. But if you're looking for a sort of a quick delve into the stories of the Trojan War and the Odyssey, then those ones would take you quite a while.
Stay tuned for guest episodes over the next few months with storytellers Jason Book and Daisy Black, as well as Jake Evans and Kat Quatermass. Season 2 will be out in the summertime.
You've been listening to The Legends of the Blue Rose, our latest Lore Talk episode. This episode of Lore and Legend came to you thanks to the contributions of our Patreon subscribers, Christy Carson and Paul Jackson. Please consider joining Christy and Paul in supporting the podcast by visiting our website and clicking Support Us for more details. If you'd like to hear the Blue Rose legends separately from this episode, you can go to the Lore and Legend website, where you can download my telling of the Blue Rose stories as a bonus episode. For those bonus episodes, we ask that you consider making a donation for the Gumroad download. You could also see a video of me telling the Blue Rose story, which I recorded for the Modern Decameron Online Storytelling Festival at the end of March. That video is available on the Modern Decameron YouTube page and also on the Lore and Legend YouTube channel. Once again, we hope that you're all staying safe and well out there at the moment. Thank you for listening, Storyfolk.